Welcome along everybody to today's writing circle on writing your literature review. My name's Kerry. Thank you for all coming along. And so everybody can hear me. Just remember microphones and cameras off, but there will be times through the session where we'll be able to turn them on and have a chat. And now that it is right on 10 o'clock, I am going to get started. So beginning with our acknowledgement, Queensland University of Technology acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay, all right, as we always start off with that little bit of housekeeping where I just remind you we have workshops and writing circles in our writing program. Workshops are more around the theory and principles of a writing practice, and we have a peer discussion, and writing circles more interactive with exemplars and practical activities. If you remember the other day, anyone who came to the research proposal writing circle, we also broke out into breakout rooms to examine the exemplar. We're not going to do that today, but as I said, we'll look at doing that a little bit more at the end of through the end of the year, and also next year too. So today's resources are already up, well, the slides are already up on Blackboard. I'm just popping the link in the chat for you. Recording will go up hopefully later on today, but I'll send you everyone an email just to let you know when it's up. So our goals for today, we're looking at what we really want to do with our lit review, which is to have a clear, well-structured lit review, and we need to have critical analysis and synthesis. So we're going to talk about that today. I also want you to remember, as always, you know, that everyone's at a different milestone within their HDR journey, and you're all writing different kinds of literature reviews. So everything we talk about today will be applicable to any sort of literature review that you're writing. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a workshop. So that's where we talked about the fundamentals of writing a literature review. So we really don't recap those too much. It's more looking at what they look like within the exemplar, those fundamentals. So that's the workshop materials, and that's on Blackboard as well. So there's the recording and the slides. So some of you might have attended. If you didn't, you're still going to get something out of the writing circle today, but what you'll find is you might want to go back and have a look at those materials just to get a bit more information. So the session today, as always, lots to do, a bit of a recap. Then we're going to look at some structure type things, and then the critical analysis and synthesis, and that's mainly going to be looking at our exemplar, and we'll have time for a Q&A as well. So did anyone not receive the email this morning with the session activity sheet? If you didn't, just say in the chat, because I can upload it, but I did send that out this morning. So just again, my little spiel about exemplars. So we want you to make evaluative judgments about the quality of writing, and exemplars help you to do that. You'll gain more, obviously, if you engage with the text and with me and your peers and the questions. So yeah, it's exemplars, the pedagogy behind them is about modeling. So modeling writing, and you look at the writing and you see whether that's applicable to write in that way for your field of study. So not just in these sessions do I want you to be noticing what you read, also everything you read. Don't just read for content. See how you feel as the reader, and what the mechanics of the writing are that make the reading flow well. And alternatively, if it's not flowing well, maybe they haven't written it. The writing quality isn't where it should be. So it sounds like everybody has the worksheet, which is great. If you don't, just pop in the chat and I'll upload it for you. Do you also have your draft lit review ready? because there's a few activities around your own writing today. You're not asked to share, it's just for your own use. And I usually recommend that you do a save as. So you've got a draft that you can utilize today and you still have your original draft there. All right, let's get started. So just a few key points about your literature review. It's a living document where you're still writing it right up until submission usually, because we want to keep adding new sources, particularly once you get to that final thesis stage. You want some current previous studies that have come out in the last sort of 6 months of you submitting is really a good thing to have in your lit review. And as we always say, make sure you continue to seek feedback, and you're going to have to redraft a lot. And as we know, your proposals, the lit review for those are going to be much shorter than your final thesis. So when you're writing up, you'll be adding quite a bit to your lit review. And of course, don't forget your different fields of study and disciplines have various ways of writing a lit review. So make sure you are aware of those. We are here at GRED, we're accommodating everybody, all the fields of study. So obviously we can't go too deeply into what exactly is needed for your field of study, but that's what you're going to notice when you do your reading. All right. Research problem is certainly something that must be reiterated over and over, and evidence is given in your lit review. Yes, you introduce it in your introduction, but the literature is where you've got all the evidence to inform and persuade the reader about the research problem, that of course that it exists. And you know, these other aspects that I have here in the slide about being urgent and challenging, that's why we need to do the study, the negative impacts the problem has. But of course, your research is going to provide some insight into helping to resolve the problem. So that's first and foremost through your whole literature review. Now, as we just said, different people in different fields of study have different ways of approaching a literature review. A lot of the time it is the narrative in a thesis or in a journal article, but you might be asked by your supervisor, or you might decide to do a systematic literature review, which is fine. You could potentially publish a systematic literature review, particularly if you are looking at doing thesis by publication. That could be something that your supervisor suggests. So we're not talking about exactly what a systematic literature review involves, because there's a lot of strict protocols that you would have to go about. So the reason why I don't go too far into it is because the library, and also you can see there the Office of Scholarly Communication, they do some workshops around the systematic literature review. So if you're planning on doing one, I highly recommend going to that Monday, 11 October workshop. I've put the link into the chat for you there. So think about that as we're going through today, whether you're doing the narrative or the systematic. And obviously what we talk about, the strategies today are applicable in both. So as we always say, writing is about the reader. So with writing about research, your reader's usually an expert in your field, but remember, they're not an expert in your study. Okay, so that's why we have to be explicit and clear all the way through, including in the literature review. Keep reminding the reader about your research aims, about your problem, about how you're formulating your research questions, and of course about the research gaps. Okay, you've got to persuade the reader, and the lit review is where you are doing most of that persuading initially about your research being significant and valuable. So the other thing about your lit review that's really important is that that's where you're providing a lot of the evidence to justify your research design. And it's something that your examiners and anyone on a panel, if you're doing confirmation, or for your final seminar, any of your documents or milestones, that's what they're looking at in regard to your literature review. They want to know, why did you cover those streams of literature and why not something else? They want to know exactly which streams of literature you've covered and why, and also, of course, justifying your research design. So things about like your participants or how you're collecting the data, if you're doing experiments, that's all the build-up of the justification is in your literature review. Potentially as well, your theoretical or your conceptual framework or your research paradigm is also articulated in your lit review, unless sometimes people have it separately. Sometimes they'll have a separate chapter all about the framework or the paradigm. So it just depends where you're up to in your journey and what your supervisors and you want to do. But that's remembering is really important for your lit review, is this is how you're setting the justification for those decisions. So having a quick look at the process of writing your lit review, and you can see down the bottom the arrows are going both ways, which means it's an iterative process going backwards and forwards. So of course, reading critically. I've put the descriptive writing in there because there is some description in there where you inform the reader about the what, the when, the where, the who in regard to previous studies and the background. But then we need to, of course, go deeper with our analysis and then our critical discussion, which leads us to our critical writing. Okay, so it is a step-by-step process, I guess, but you are going backwards and forwards, and it's a continual process. So it won't just happen all of a sudden. It'll take a lot of feedback and drafts and time, but you can definitely achieve it. It's understanding that descriptive writing is needed in there, of course, to describe everything, but you need to go deeper, okay? And that's what we're going to be looking at in our exemplar today too. So thinking about your literature reviews, this is something we looked at in the workshop about understanding the purpose of your lit review. So it's to convince the reader, as we said, about the problem and the value of your study. And you achieve that by providing all of the evidence from the literature and analysing and putting forward your stance. So that's something we go, excuse me, into a much deeper in the workshop. But basically, when you know the purpose and the aims of your lit review, depending on where it is within your whole document and which document you're writing, then when you understand all of the purposes, that demonstrates your critical thinking and also your ability to be a researcher and to undertake this project. So your lit review, not the most fun thing potentially to write, but so important within any kind of research project. So this is something we looked at in the workshop, and this is 11 or so points of what potentially you might need to be including in your literature review. So as we said, it'll depend on your current milestone. They're not in any specific order, by the way, but it is a good overview to get you thinking and have a clear idea to make sure that you're including all the purposes that you need to include. Now, you have that little table in your activity sheet. So if you want to open that up to that first page, because we've got our first activity. So what I would like you to do is open up the activity sheet. If anyone's just joined and they don't have the activity sheet, please let me know so I can upload it into the chat for you. But if you can open it up and just have a look through the purposes in the table and have a think, depending on where you are right now in the document you're writing, think of the purposes that are high priority and you think must be included in your lit review. And then there might be some that are low priority, particularly if you're at the proposal stage, or even if you are writing a journal article, because of course we know they're quite short. So have a little think about that. I'm going to give you 10 minutes or so here because I want you to first identify the high and the low priority, and then check your draft. Have a look at the moment. If you've identified some high priorities, do you already have them in there? Do you think you've written enough? And then the low priority ones, do you think that they're, have you written too much, or do you need to restructure a little bit? So just checking that you've addressed all of those purposes, let's call it. Okay, let me just pop that into the chat. There's someone that didn't have it. Okay. Oh. Sorry, there was an error. I'll fix that and do it again. All right, so what do we got? 10:15. So I'm going to give you the next sort of 10 minutes to identify the purposes and have a look at your draft and make sure you've addressed everything. I'm right here if you need to put anything in the chat. I'm just going to pop onto mute for a minute. So just had a question in the chat about time frame. So good questions, by the way. So the time frame, what I mean there is what period of the literature are you reviewing? So that's going to depend on, well, a lot of things about your field of study. Potentially you've got seminal researchers going back 30, 40, 50 years. Maybe it's a new research field, so you can only, there's really only anything from the last 5 years maybe. Now, if you're doing a systematic literature review, that would definitely be where you have to specify the time frame of what literature you're exactly looking at. So that's a time frame, and scope is about the research project as a whole and how broad or narrow you're going. Now, because you're limited as far as doing a research degree, you have a specific period of time and you're one person essentially. So your scope would be, so for example, if I wanted to do some research investigating something to do with how patients recover from operations, let's say. So your scope would involve, who are your participants going to be? Are you going to collect data from patients? Are you going to collect data from nurses, from doctors, from potentially the physio or an occupational therapist? So do you see what I mean? So realistically, you couldn't collect data from everyone to do with that issue. So you would narrow it and you would justify why you were collecting the data from those people specifically. You might be reducing the scope by the geographic area. So maybe you're focusing on something that's in Brisbane or Queensland or Australia. You know what I mean? So it's all those sorts of things. And also every research field or issue would have numerous variables. Okay. And so again, you would identify, okay, there's all these variables to do with this research issue. This research will focus on variable 1, 2, and 3. It's not going to talk about variables 5, 6, and 7 because they're out of the scope. Okay, so it's those sorts of things. Now, someone also asked in the chat, could the scope be identified in the background? Definitely. So this is the thing, this is your juggle. You've got all these purposes depending on which literature review you're writing right now. Is it a proposal, the final thesis, a journal article? You can't include all of those things potentially. And which order will they go in? Is some to do with the background. So there's a lot going on, isn't there? So that's why we've got our drafts and we seek feedback and we're constantly revising the structure and how everything's going to fit together. All right, good. So hopefully you're all good to move on and that activity was helpful. All right, so now we're going to start. So that was a bit of a recap. A lot of that stuff was in the workshop, okay? So if you did want some more information about any of those purposes, they're covered in the workshop. So let's have a look now about structure. So just very broadly, let's talk about the examiners. Ultimately, they're your reader. And this isn't, I don't talk about this to be scary. It's to be, what's the word? Just to be clear, you know, that's what you're doing. All right. You're going to have an examiner. So let's acknowledge it and let's get some understanding on what they're looking for. And the lit review is important for them. Okay. That's, like we said, it sets everything up and it shows that you have good analytical skills. Okay. So if the literature review is weak and they're not being led through and they don't gain a deep understanding of your study, they're going to be more picky in the rest of the thesis, particularly around your research design. Okay. But if you have an excellent literature review and there's critical engagement, and you're showing your deep understanding and helping them to gain a deep understanding, then they're going to look at the rest of the thesis more favorably. So it's as simple as that. Really, the lit review is very, very important part of any research project. And as we said before, I know it's can be difficult and it's sort of boring maybe, and it's hard, but you will definitely get there. And, you know, in it, as we said, writing is a process. So, all right. So with your literature review, it's a crucial part of the research story, isn't it? That's what we were just saying. So your introduction, whether it's a section of a proposal or a chapter in a final thesis, it gives the broad overview of everything and starts to tell the reader about the main issues, and plants all the seeds for everything that will come next. The literature review then broadens all of that and provides the details and the evidence that of the issues that you've raised in the introduction. And then the design, your methodology, your methods is all set up in the lit review, and it follows on quite nicely from all the evidence you've given in the lit review. And then of course the discussion and the lit review, they're mirrors. Okay, so they'll be quite similar in far as the topics you talk about and the issues, but the discussion is great because now we've got your data analysis in there too, and your interpretation of the data. All right, so organizing or structuring your literature review. These are the three most common or four most common ways. So chronologically, so how the research field has developed over time. Thematic, you might base it on methodology of previous researchers. Perhaps you've got a conceptual or theoretical framework, and that's a good way to set out. But I doubt you're going to be able to just do one of these. Through it, you might have to use a bit of a combination. Okay, so start using your mind maps regularly, whatever software, or just using post-it notes or whatever it might be. It's going to help you to see the big picture and think about which of those sort of four ways to organize might be best for each section. And then, of course, the lit review as a whole. It's a work in progress. Just start, think what you believe is the right way for now, and then you'll be able to refine as you go. One of my friends, when I was studying, a couple of days before she submitted, she flipped her lit review back to front because she couldn't get it. It wasn't quite flowing how she wanted. So she flipped it over and it worked beautifully. So, you know, it is a work in progress, and you're going to get all the good feedback, and you'll be thinking about it a lot as well. Write down all your thoughts to keep track, and just write, and it'll all come together in the end. So talking about putting thought into things, put thought into your subheadings. Okay, we talk about the reader and leading the reader through. The subheadings are what help to lead the reader through. So initially it's helping to guide you. So you're going to draft those subheadings. Maybe they're going to align with some of those purposes. Maybe they're aligning with the structure you're going to go with, you know, with the methodology or the themes or the framework, depending on what you're using. But for the readers, the subheadings, they're the visual clues. They're shedding the light on the topic and what's going to be written in the next section. So we want them to be really clear so that we can lead the reader through in a really good way. Now, with your literature review, I can't give you these are your subheadings, because everyone is going to be different. Could you not use the activity sheet table as a subheadings? You could, maybe, but some of those are quite broad, aren't they? Some of those purposes. So, but definitely that would be a really good way to start. Yep, to start your drafting for sure. Now, another really good way is have a look at somebody else's thesis. I put this in pretty much all of the time. So anyone who's been to our writing sessions, pretty much every time I spruik e-prints, if you do that thesis search, and what's really good is you can see where I've circled and highlighted thesis format. You can choose the one that fits you, the monograph, the by publication, or the creative works, and you can put in some topics just to see how other people in your field have structured. To be honest, as far as the subheadings go, it's not going to be that much help because they've got a completely different topic to you. But it might help you to see things like what I'm talking about, where we usually go from broad and down to narrow in our lit review. So you wouldn't start off your lit review by saying, oh, an important variable in this research is blah, blah, blah. Okay, of course, you've got to set the scene before you get into all those smaller points about the variables and everything like that. So I hope that makes sense. But the e-prints is really, really useful. And I'm not saying you have to go and look at 10. You probably only have to go and look at a couple, 2 or 3, just to give you some ideas. And also what happens when you look at other people's thesis, you see it and you can say, I actually don't like the way they've done that. I prefer my way, which is good as well, because it gives you a little bit of backing and support that you're on the right track. So here's an example. Now this is from the exemplar that we're looking at today. And the reason why I'm showing you this example is to show you every literature review subheadings, so they're always going to be different. But what I would want from your table of contents for your literature review is to be able to look at it and say, okay, I can take a pretty good guess about what your thesis or your research is about. So looking at that, so it's chapter 2, lit review. What can we see so far? If you want to write it in the chat, what is this research about? Can we tell from just this one bit of the table of contents for the literature review? What do you think? You can pop some things into the chat if you like, even if it's just one thing. You know, what is this research investigating? Can you tell, or is it a mystery? I'm hoping it's not a mystery. Right, academic literacy, yes. Anything else? Teaching, good. Who are we teaching? Anyone in particular? What kind of participants are we looking at here? What's the scope? Tertiary students, any particular kinds of tertiary students? Maybe you don't know the acronym. EAL means English as an additional language, which would have already been set up, obviously, in the introduction. So international students, exactly. Any particular time of them being at university, can we tell? No, they're not arts. That doesn't, yes. So not HDRs, first year undergrads, right? Okay, now looking at 2.6, looking there, 2.6.2, 2.6.3, 2.6.4, we're getting into the nitty gritty, aren't we, here, of exactly what is this research looking at? Any idea? 2.6.4 is probably the biggest tip. So it's classroom practices. So see how this literature review, we've gone from broad, it's going to tell us all about what academic literacy is. Because it's the theoretical framework. There's a specific part about academic reading. We're looking at, yes, so curriculum, classroom practices, yes. So looking at reading, looking at who are these EAL students, where are they coming from? What are their pathways in? What's their language like? What do they think before they arrive at university? And then narrowing even down. So they've arrived and they're enrolled in their courses. What do they experience within the curriculum and the classroom? So I'm hoping that what you're getting just from this example is your table of contents is going to look nothing like that. But at a glance, I want to be able to tell what you're researching, you know, at least basically. So that brings us to our next activity. So I'm going to give you just 5 minutes for this. But it's a good thing you can get started on, and then you can go back later. So you might already have a table of contents generated for your lit review, but you might not have one yet. So just do a quick copy and paste of your subheadings and manually make sort of like a table of contents. Don't worry about the page numbers and things like that. I just want your subheadings, and I want you to have a look and tell me, well, tell yourself, do they tell the story of your topic and your study, or are the subheadings a little bit vague? Now, if you're at the research proposal stage, you're not going to have many subheadings, which is okay, all right, because it's quite short. If you're writing a research article, again, you're probably not going to have many subheadings. So in that case, rather than taking your subheadings, you could potentially just take some of your topic sentences for your paragraphs maybe. But if you're sort of further along, even a confirmation document, your table of contents or your subheadings listed should tell you a good story. Okay. So yeah, someone in the chat said that the research is about classroom practices to improve English language literacy among international university students. Yep, and first years. That's it, pretty much. Good. All right, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. Let's say until 10:45, because I've been talking. Please ask questions, and I'll just pop on mute for a second. Okay, how's everybody going? So in the chat, my TOC is a bit vague. Refinement which matches what as good headings will arrive. Yeah, and that's fine. That's why we write drafts, okay? And especially in the proposal stage. And you know what? You'll hand in that proposal and then you'll refine it more again. The summary sentence of what the research is about. Do the headings read as the problem or the solution? Let me just go back. I think what you mean, the summary that is, yeah. So that's a couple of paragraphs that reviews the lit review that's just occurred. So it's the end of the chapter, okay? So the subheading that you have for that sort of summary could be anything, you know, that was just the one this one went with. What I would do is avoid at the end of a chapter having a subheading of conclusion, because you'll ultimately have a conclusion chapter. And the same at the beginning, I would avoid having a subheading that says introduction. Okay, now it's not the end of the world. If that's what you want to do, that's all right. But can you see what I mean? Is that you will have an introduction chapter and a conclusion chapter. So within your actual chapters, try to avoid those subheadings, but it's up to you. So I hope that answers your question. So 2.7 is the summary of that chapter. And rather than just writing the word summary, it says summary of current EAL and academic literacies research gaps, because they're the two main variables, let's call them. All right. Good. All right. Well, I hope that exercise was helpful as well. You know, and these sorts of things that we do, you can do them again and again, you know, when you're proofreading, when you're, you know, doing your big picture planning. All right. So the other thing we need to do for our structure, as well as have good subheadings, is to, of course, keep the reader in the loop. So you're going to have that introduction paragraph or section, depending. If it's if you've got a whole chapter because it's your final thesis, you would have an introduction section. If you're writing your proposal, you would have an introduction paragraph. Okay, so we're reminding the reader, remembering that it's all part of your whole story, isn't it? Okay, so we want all of our chapters or sections to almost stand alone by continually reminding the reader of why we're here and what we're doing. And then at the end, you'll have the summary of your main points to say that, you're going to address some of the research gaps, you're going to get insight into this problem, and exactly what you're going to find out and how. So now we are going to go into our, I'm going to go out of the slides, and we're actually going to go into the worksheet now. So as I keep saying about these exemplars, we want to analyze and discuss and notice, okay? All right, so I am going to stop my share. Okay, and I'm gonna go back to this. All right, so hopefully now you can see the activity sheet. All right. So this is from a different, it's not the same as the exemplar, and it's not the same as the table of contents that I just showed you. The reason I've used this one instead is because it's just a paragraph. If we used our exemplar, it would be numerous paragraphs, and this does what we need it to do. This models the type of thing you would have. So this is actually for a master's dissertation. So you can, you've got the worksheet in front of you. And there's a couple of questions there. So let's have a quick look through. Now, as we go, I'm actually going to highlight the information, the vocabulary, the words, and the things that I think are good in this writing. So this chapter critically reviews the literature, so good, regarding one-to-one academic writing support in the Australian tertiary education context. So this is the type of things that tell you the scope. So we're talking about Australia, and we're talking about tertiary. Knowledge of the concepts and issues raised in previous studies provides a background of understanding for this study. Academic writing proficiency is a fundamental element. Okay, so note the vocabulary. It's not any kind of element, it's a fundamental element of university education because you've got to do assignments and exams. However, so there's transition signals that we like. Researchers have argued that first-year international undergraduate students are rarely given sufficient guidance within tertiary curricula to improve their writing skills. Okay, what do you think of this? The EG. So in APA 7, you can use this to say researchers, and these are just 2 examples, so there's more. Now, you might like that. Your supervisor might not like it. So see what they say. You don't have to do that. You could get rid of it and just have that. But in my view, the reason why we put EG is to tell the reader this is just a few of them. Okay, and there's more. But that's completely up to you. So researchers have argued, notice the tense, we're in present perfect because we're talking about the research as a whole. Okay, that first year are rarely given sufficient guidance. To address this issue, many universities offer individual writing support to international students. While research into ESL, so English as a second language writing pedagogy, has been a major focus for many years, there has been less research into the role and nature of one-to-one writing support in the university context. This qualitative research study aims to address this gap by investigating the teaching strategies used by experienced language teachers. And then it's specified again there. So there's more about the scope of this specific study. So see the broad to the narrow. Australian tertiary education context is broad up there. And then we come back and say, well, this actual study, which is qualitative, it's looking at first year international business students specifically. And then that would be justified later or earlier, but no, later, because this is the first paragraph, isn't it? The literature review focuses on 5 key areas. Firstly, there's something, next there's something else, then we've got a review of the teaching strategies to determine the gaps and provide a framework from which the research questions can be formulated. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? We haven't actually touched on that. Isn't that partly what your literature review purpose is as well? It's helping to formulate, once you know the gaps, what are your research questions? So that's something to remember as well. So looking at this, what do you think? Is the research problem stated? Do you think yes? You can pop in the chat if you think so. I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to wait for you to tell me which sentences. So the research problem, that's probably not a problem, is it? It's just stating a fact. So potentially it's this, isn't it? They're not given the guidance that they need. Do you agree? Oh yeah, thank you. Someone said sentence 4. Anywhere else that there's something to do with the research problem? Not really. I mean, this is the gap, isn't it? That's the gap, sentence 6. All right, is the research aim stated? Well, it's aiming to address the gap. So look, I would say here is the research aim. I'm going to say sort of, actually, because it's not just the gap, is it, that's being investigated. It's also to find out more insight. Yeah, the research aim and the research problem. So the research aim is to find something out. The research problem is why we need to find out more information. Does that make sense? So the problem here is that undergraduate students, they're not given sufficient guidance within the curricula. So they go to all their courses, they go to their workshops and their lectures, but there's nothing in there to teach them how they're meant to be writing academically. So lots of universities offer individual writing support to international students. They can book and come to an educator like me. And this is undergrads, remember, that we're talking about. So that's the problem. The problem is academic writing is hard. These students are potentially coming to Australia and their writing needs to be improved, but their actual courses are not helping them with that. They have this one-to-one. Now, obviously, one-to-one writing support costs a lot of money, doesn't it? So we need to make sure that it's pedagogically useful, and we need evidence for that. So I hope that makes sense. But so is the research aim stated? Kind of, but I think not specifically. It's saying aims to address this gap, but That's not telling us exactly what is in, what the exact aim is it? So that's probably something that would need to be in here. There's the aim of the lit review, so that's all right. Is there information about what's included in the literature review? Yep, and that's those final sentences, which is what? 8 to 11. Okay, so not bad. I think it's pretty good, remembering then there'll be another paragraph after that. But yeah, not too bad. There's some good vocabulary in there. It's setting us up to understand what's going to be in the literature review. And it's talked about the fact that there's a problem. All right. So now I'm going to get you to go for 5 minutes into your own writing and check your first paragraph. So you can go and do that right now. So that's activity 3B. I'm just going to pop out of this screen and back into the slides while you do that. Okay, so in the chat, is the aim the same as the contributions to theory? Yeah, more or less. The aim is to gain insight into some things in order to help solve a problem. Okay. Good questions, guys. All right, so I'm going to move on. All righty. All right, critical analysis and synthesis, really important. We did talk about these in the workshop, but we're going to very briefly touch on them, and then we're going to look for them in our exemplar, okay? So we want to inform and persuade. Remember, we said at the beginning, there is some description, obviously, of the aspects of the topic, and you do describe some previous studies as well, but we need to go further. What's the meaning behind it? You need to put in your critical analysis. So in terms of synthesis, so you're not just looking at one study or two studies, are you? You're looking at the research field as a whole, and you're also looking at a number of previous studies as a whole that have come up with similar findings, and then you'll have the ones that have come up with differences, or there'll be different findings that have used different methods, and that's why they've got different findings. So there's a lot going on, I know, so you need to figure out the best way to synthesize. So we look at that in our examples. In our exemplar, the critical analysis is making those judgments and taking a stance. Okay, so you can't just to say that someone did a previous study and they found A, B, and C. Yes, but what's the meaning behind those findings? Do they align with others? Is the methodology they use similar to what you're doing or something different? What were the limitations? What participants did they use? What was the context? So now, and you can't do that for every single study on its own. That's why we need to synthesize them in together. So synthesis and critical analysis are happening at the same time. Okay, we're going to look at the exemplar. And as I said, we want the reader to achieve a deep understanding of the topic, of the problem, of the gaps. Okay, so if you're just saying someone did something and someone else did something else, I call it words on a page. Okay, we don't want words on a page. We want that critical analysis. We want to know the so what. Why do we care? Why do we need more insight into this problem, and what's the value of your research? So synthesis, we're looking at the body of evidence, not just one or two studies. That's what we we're just talking about, so you can discuss multiple studies at once. As we said, you're looking at the relationships, the patterns, the strengths, the weaknesses, any controversies. Make sure, of course, you include all your seminal researchers as well. So if you do pull out some studies to discuss, then they're obviously important for some reason. We need to explain to the reader what's important because they're setting up what you're then going to extend on most likely. So don't just give us one sentence. Let us know a bit more about these important studies, okay? We'll see that in the exemplar in a minute. Don't leave out the methodology. That's something I've already mentioned, and that's what I notice a lot when I read a lit review, or literature reviews plural, where the findings are blah, 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 but there's nothing about what the research design was. And as we said, this is one of the main functions of your lit review, is to start to justify your research process. I'm not saying, by the way, that you have to do the methodology for every single one, but you would broadly say most studies utilize qual or quant or whatever it might be. And then how does this match with what you're doing? Maybe methodology is one of the things that's going to be an implication because you're doing something different. Okay, but tell the reader everything. So critical analysis, it's examining everything. How did we gain this knowledge? What's been debated? You're putting forward a map that tells us how you got to the fact that there's these gaps and the problem, and you need to make it all explicit. So the best way to explain synthesis and critical analysis is to have a look at our exemplar, which we're going to do in a second. So just really quickly, something that I talk about quite a lot is the idea of words having power. And you can see from these examples that just by adding a describing word and adjective, it really makes it much better for the reader, doesn't it? So there's some examples there. Reporting verbs, really important. So mix them up. And again, we'll see those in these in the exemplar in a minute, but you can see there's weak reporting verbs, neutral and strong. Okay, so if a previous study you want to talk about because it's good and you're extending off of their findings or potentially having similar findings, then you would use strong reporting verbs. If you're talking about a study that you think hasn't yielded very good findings, then you would go with the weaker position. And if you're just saying this is the way it is, if you're giving a definition maybe, but you're citing someone, then you can go with the neutral. But we'll have a look at those in the exemplar. And there's some more there. You can just Google reporting verbs and you can get something like this. It's pretty easy. All right, so yay. Now we're going to go into our exemplar, and what I'm going to do today is get you to just spend about 15 minutes now. I think that should give us enough time. And I want you to just read through, jot down some notes, try and answer the questions that are at the end of every paragraph. And then after 15 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to go through it together. Okay. So a little bit differently to what we often do. Often we do the whole thing together, but I think you guys are good now at analysing the exemplars. If you're not sure of anything, if you don't know the answers, that's okay. That's all part of the exercise and we'll come back together. So, so that's the way we're going to do it today. So open up the worksheet. It's now 10 past. So at 25 past, we're going to come back and we're going to go through it together. And that's pretty much the end of what we have to do. Now, if you think 15 minutes is too long, just pop into the chat and say, hey, I'm finished, and we'll see where everybody's at. All right, so I'm going to be here. If you have. All right, so basically this is the one section from a literature review from a PhD. So you can see here, the whole chapter is 15,000 words. Actually, this section's more than 2,500. Oh, sorry, the section is 2,500 and most of it actually is in here, although it has been reduced a little bit. Okay, so there was a lot going on, wasn't there here? We want to look at the vocabulary, the critical analysis, the synthesis, how the paragraphs are flowing and all of those things. So I'm going to go through and I'll try not to go too fast, but, you know, ask me questions as we go. We already had one question about the tense, which is a really good question. Those of you who know me well know that that's a bit of an obsession of mine about people getting the tense correct. So the reason why sometimes the author, when the reporting verbs are in present tense, would be because it's explaining something that is the case right now, like a definition or something that's quite important and is happening now. Whereas if we talk about one specific study, we really need to be in past tense because it happened in the past. But then we talk about the implications of the findings. We could then go into present tense. And then when we talk about the research in general or as a whole, we're usually in present perfect. So these are the decisions the writer has to make as we go through. The one grammar rule around tense is that one sentence has to be in the same tense, but within a paragraph, you might go in and out of present and past, and that's okay. So a sentence in present, a sentence in past, and so on. And that's fine. Just within one sentence, it has to be the same tense, either present simple or past simple. Basically, because how can something be in the past and now all at the same time? If it is, we use present perfect. So I hope that makes sense, but I can point it out as we go. All right, paragraph 1. Oh, and also this is, you know, notice this is 2.4. So there's been a lot of information before this as well. So this is specific to academic reading. And one of the reasons I choose this as an exemplar is we all can understand about reading. Okay, so where can you see the author's critical analysis? So we touched on it very quickly before, that critical analysis is through the words we use and also those explicit statements which say, well, what does this mean and the so what? So let's have a look. I mean, it's just this even, excuse me, significant, that's critical analysis. Reading has a big part to play, not any part, a big part. So that's sort of the simple kinds of ways of showing critical analysis. But what else is there? What about this? This is a weakness that requires urgent attention. So again, the vocabulary is very strong, isn't it, to say that so to date, the field of academic literacy research has focused on writing, which it has. So reading is sort of almost like an invisible part of it when actually they're linked together. Here's a good example of using present tense to talk about a specific study, which we wouldn't always do. But why is that, do you think? So this is what's happening now, okay? So that's why it's in present tense. So if we made it Hill and Mayo argued, then you could still have it the same sentence, I guess, but I feel like, and this is, as we say, this is your what you decide as the writer each time, okay? The implication of this gap is that the development of effective academic has been neglected. So again, we've got that strong vocabulary. Again, and then another sentence that's strong as well. Must be active and critical readers to gain a deep understanding of and to use all of these things. So basically it's setting up, why do we care about reading and why do we need to know more information? Because we don't know enough, it hasn't been researched enough, and it's a really important skill for literacy and learning at university. So yep, we can see the author's voice and their critical analysis, and there's information about why it's important. So see how these things are overlapping. The critical analysis is all part of the information, but it's not just information, it's going that little bit deeper. So using words to convince and persuade the reader that we should care about reading. Paragraph 2, academic reading is more complex than other readings, such as reading for pleasure. Many students need guidance. So again, we've gone into the present tense, haven't we? Why? Because, well, he's a seminal author for a start, so he hasn't changed his mind. He still would believe this, but it's trying to set up that this is the case right now. So if I said here, as Havela explained, it makes it less here and now, I guess you could put it as, but it would be okay. Okay. But then if we made this explained, we'd have to make that shared. Do you see? So that's a reason for that. Okay. So this means, this is, maybe you don't like that. This means up to you. I wouldn't say it 100 times, but it's a good way of just saying, it's that next sentence to explain the previous point, which is sort of like a definition, isn't it? And that's what I mean by going deeper. It's really important you do that for the reader. So this means when students have academic writing difficulties, it's potentially because of their reading. Blah, blah, has an impact on their learning. Again, we've got the word significant. Potentially we need to change that word up a bit, do we? This has led researchers, so there's that EG again, to determine a need for systematic and in-depth research, investigating reading experiences and the extent to which these things influence. So this is setting it up, isn't it? This is setting up that this is why we care, right? And yep, the synthesis of the previous studies. So we've got those ones. So 2 sources there. And then we've got the EG. There's quite a few there. There's Havela again. And then these studies can add, meaning studies that do systematic and in-depth research. Okay, so see how it's setting out, which would be matching the aims, which would have been talked about many, many times previously. So according to all these researchers, we need more studies investigating. So there is the synthesis in there by saying the researchers as a whole. And well, the citation style, it's APA. So notice that it's in alphabetical order there. Okay, so paragraph 3, the fundamental link. So see how that was set up here about how that if there's a problem with learning and writing, it's potentially due to reading. Okay, so all of these 2 first paragraphs are setting the seed about why we care. We're planting the seed about why we care about reading. And also, remember the table of contents that we looked at? That's from this exemplar, and it was looking at literacy practices, and it was talking about instruction in the classroom. So it comes back to that bigger picture here. So if we have these studies doing systematic research, we're going to enhance what happens in the classroom. So then we've got more explanation. Reading and writing can't be seen as separate. They're meaning making. We've got a good transition signal there. Yet university pedagogies treat reading as a basic skill and teachers are unlikely to implement explicit reading instruction. Okay. So there's the critical analysis. So back up here, it was a bit about the gap, wasn't it? But here we're back to the research problem. Why do we care about reading? Why would we do research into reading? Well, because it's really an important part of academic literacy. They shouldn't be separated. And there's another seminal researcher is Wingate. They contend that the pedagogies at the moment in the classroom are not being implemented to help with the reading, or even this idea of fostering positive attitudes. So there's writing support, which we saw, didn't we, in the other exemplar, but not necessarily reading support. The assumption is students already can read critically. This is concerning. So there's some more critical analysis. Consequently, we need to explore the reading demands and examine how they perceive and manage this component of their studies. So again, the value is being stated in here by saying, again, reading and writing are really important. They're interlinked. There's writing support, there's not reading support, and blah, blah, blah. So there's another issue. So this is how that is leading on. So this was all about the fact about how much reading there is. Maybe students don't think reading's important. Maybe they're not fast at reading. And so because of these things, the teachers need to be explicit and teach it. However, many academic staff don't think reading compliance is their responsibility. So again, we're coming back to the problem, back to the issue. Why should we do this research? Well, because we need to improve the way things are being done. Another seminal author here, Guy. Now this one, see this last sentence, how important it is to bring it back to, okay, remember we've got a problem. What kind of insight is this research going to give us? Well, we're going to see if teachers are using the modelling and the feedback, because the students need it to become members of their academic community. So is a possible link? Yep. It's all about the teachers. All right, keeping on going. So although there's been little attention given to reading, there has been a number of recent studies which have shed some light. Okay, so here we've been saying, there's not much research. It's not being done all that well at the moment, but some people, okay. So we've got, this is the first time we've got a specific study. So this one surveyed 40 first year students, given the context. So there's a lot of information being given just there in one sentence. So us as readers, we can go, okay, that's interesting. They did a survey. The findings revealed, the participants reported specific challenges, and then they had a suggestion that they weren't lazy, they were using a cost-benefit strategy. And then it goes along. So do we think that this is an important study in the scheme of the previous studies? Looks like it, doesn't it? Because there's a whole paragraph on it. And the research methods are definitely noted. Paragraph 6. So again, we've got Roberts and Roberts. So this is partly our synthesis, isn't it? A later study undertaken by these people. Now, whether you go like that and chronological will depend. That's how it's gone here, isn't it? So we've got the themes as such, as far as the subheadings go. And then within here, we've got a little bit of chronology of how the researchers have added and added. So similar, so very explicit, isn't it? Similar to. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Then a later study, 2012. And then a final sentence to then bring us back to, we need reading pedagogy to be implemented, therefore we need this research, okay? So the reporting verbs in here, so advise, examined, what about up here? They just state, suggested, surveyed, so mixing it up. So another issue, so letting the reader go to know that there's another part of reading that we're looking at. Go on, there's another survey. There's another comparison, another one there. Okay, tendency for universities to use multiple choice quizzes. So potentially that's something that was collected regarding the data, wouldn't we say? And then we've come back again to say, okay, we need this study because we need to understand about textbooks and reading quizzes. So explicit judgments are all through. Okay, another comparison more recently. There's 2 more studies, blah, blah, blah. And then we go back to Roberts and Roberts there. And then this last sentence is important. So when you're looking at your writing, go back and see those last sentences of the paragraphs and see if you're bringing it back to your research problem or your research aim or something important that you're going to be investigating. So this is the last paragraph in the section. So it's basically the summary. I would say indicates the need. I don't think that that is strong enough, really. I think we could even go stronger. But there's the 3 issues that were discussed. And then there was something in there. We've also got another gap about the researchers looking at postgrads, but it's undergrads that are the ones that would be needing to implement and improve their understanding. So see how bringing it back to the one of the variables in this study by saying undergraduates, we need to know more. And then we've got that final sentence here, which is really important as well. Okay, help to shift university and disciplinary pedagogy. So remember, the problem is reading's not being taught. There's not enough help and support for the students. And so by showing that we need that, we can make a shift to the way the universities are organising their courses. So is clear gaps? Yes. Is the value of the research clear? Yes. We're going to start, we're going to have some evidence towards making changes to pedagogy and the way the courses are set up and the activities. Okay, so I hope that all made sense. Has anyone got any questions before I jump? Actually, I will jump out and we'll just go to the last few slides and then we'll have our Q&A. Okay, so just some final tips that which we've said all the way through is about proofreading, seeking feedback, print out if you can and read aloud you'll hear when things need to be improved. Of course, we're going to notice when we read. There's a lot of resources on Blackboard, so I'll just pop the link in there again. And yeah, ask for help if you need it. This is a really good article. Doesn't matter what field you're in. If you're into a checklist, it's a really good article that I would recommend. Okay, so we've just got left a little bit of information of the things that are coming up and our Q&A. So if you don't mind, I would love it if you would fill in our survey. It is anonymous. I've just popped the link in the chat. So I'm just going to turn off my mic for 1 minute while you guys quickly go in. I'll come back to that question in the chat in a minute. So the peer feedback sessions, that's something that would be helpful. We've got the HDR Writers Wellbeing Lounge. That's where you do writing sprints and get some writing done. Again, I've given you the link in the chat. And any more information that you need, it's all on Blackboard, and there's also a HDR skills assessment tool as well. I've given you those links. Okay, so basically your lit review, it's a living document. You're going to keep working on it. It will take time, but you will definitely get there. Keep track of your purposes, make the research problem explicit and clear throughout, and inform and persuade the reader. Okay, so Q&A now. Why don't we, no, there's a peer feedback this Thursday. I think the lounge has already been on for this week. What day is it today? Oh, no, maybe it's tomorrow. Hang on, I'll have a check for you. Actually, no, there's no lounge this week. Oh, hang on. I'm in the wrong week, sorry. Yeah, no lounge, but there is a peer feedback session. Okay, so how about, yes, the recording and the slides will be available. The slides are already on Blackboard. All right, so what I might do is stop my share, and let's go in and answer the questions that you had before everybody has to go. Okay, let me see, what do we have? So paragraph 7. Okay, I thought the author was only describing the finding of previous studies rather than analysing them. Should we not talk about both sides of the solution method if we are critically analysing? Yep, you're right. I think that something, oh, am I sharing? Oh, yeah. I think that something to remember is that part of when you're justifying your research methods, you're not always having to justify why you're not doing other things necessarily. It's a bit of a balance, isn't it? So basically, remember too, this is one section of the whole literature review, but it is a good pickup. So if we look at paragraph 7, you're right, it's basically commenting that this was a survey. This one was a quantitative study as well. This was another survey, so you're right. So there could probably be a comment because this survey was actually mixed. It was quant and qual. So you have to weigh up is whether you're going to, at what point are you going to put comment about your research design? And potentially maybe at the end of the section, you could make a comment and say, well, another issue was that all of these were surveys, which obviously has some limitations. Or you could talk about the good things about the surveys if you are doing a survey. But yeah, no, I would probably agree that it hasn't critically analysed them in that paragraph. Don't necessarily have to talk about both sides in every paragraph though, but it would be something you could comment on when you were summarising the section. So yeah, good pickup. Do each of the sentences in paragraph 9 summarise each previous paragraph? More or less it should. So the use of textbooks was in there, reading quizzes, promoting reading compliance. I have a feeling there was a couple of paragraphs I didn't pop in here, so that could be why. But this was definitely the final paragraph. Another research gap was about it being postgrads. So potentially, so the comment about postgrad, I'm not sure whether that was totally highlighted up here, because all of these seem to be about undergrads. There would be something in there, their first years. So yeah, another really good pickup, which means you're noticing as you're reading, which is awesome. So yep, I agree. Potentially, yes, summarizing each of the paragraphs, but possibly this issue wasn't, it may have been highlighted, I can't remember. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. Any other questions then? We've just about come to our time. It can be Michael's saying in the chat, it's difficult to access the article. Go into the QUT library. That's where I got it. I just went into the library. Yeah, you could put it in the chat if you want to. So you mean that the I got it from the library, the QUT library. I don't have it up anymore. Yeah, so if you can't find it with the DOI, just pop it into, oh, thank you. You got the PDF there. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's useful. I hope it's not overwhelming with the checklist. All right, excellent. Well, I'm glad you guys have found it useful. Thank you for persevering. It's always finding exemplars. I'm not complaining, but it is hard. So, and I do like to mix it up. I don't like using the same exemplars all the time. So, but yeah, I think you guys did a really good job with examining. All right, good. Thank you guys. No worries at all. Good luck.